Well, hello there. So glad we get to continue our study into the miracles of Jesus, which again, we are just rapidly coming to the climax of the story of the Gospels, which is the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And in fact, we are now at the beginning of that narrative. We've been talking about Jesus' return to Jerusalem. He has come for the final time for this final Passover week. We've talked about how he has entered triumphantly, how he has had clashes with the Pharisees and the teachers of Israel. And those clashes continue for several days. Jesus is teaching in the temple, and oftentimes conflict arises in words, not so much in deeds at this point. But the Pharisees are certainly seeing Jesus as a direct threat and have begun to directly plot against him. What we're going to read about tonight is something that we might not often think of as a miracle, but it is, in fact, an important miracle, I think, to the overall crucifixion story. And so we know that Jesus, as the Passover approaches, partakes of the last Passover meal with his disciples, what is then going to recognize by Christians as the Lord's Supper, an event that we commemorate every Lord's Day to remind ourselves of our own part in the Passover sacrifice that was our Lord and Savior. And so what we then see is that Jesus and his disciples begin to prepare themselves, more so Jesus preparing the disciples and the disciples really not fully understanding what's going on. But they go their way to Gethsemane, to the Mount of Olives, to pray and for Jesus to prepare himself for what is about to take place. And so Jesus has been talking to his disciples and encourages them in these things and is giving them a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to consider in the coming days and in the coming years. One of the things that is said to them, if you want to turn over to Luke chapter 22, and that's where we're going to be getting the bulk of our narrative today. In Luke chapter 22 and in verse 35, Jesus says to them, "When I sent you out without money belt and bag and sandals, you did not lack anything, did you?" They said, "No, nothing." He said to them, "But now whoever has a money belt is to take it along, likewise also a bag. Whoever has no sword is to sell his coat and buy one. For I tell you that which is written must be fulfilled in me. He was numbered with transgressors. For that which refers to me has its fulfillment." They said, "Lord, look, here are 2 swords." And he said to them, "That's enough." This is a pretty common passage that we go to. I think we often misapply what the purpose of this passage is. I think this is a very poor passage to use for self-defense. I think there's a lot of other passages that more directly deal with that idea. Jesus is trying to make the point to his disciples that their ministry is about to change. They've been teaching the word. Now they're going to be dramatically opposed. Before, they were being fairly well received and being taken care of. Now they need to prepare to face opposition. And so Jesus tells them that, you need to be prepared to fight these things. And he's talking about spiritual warfare. He's talking about, fighting against the enemies that are already forming against them in the Pharisees. And the disciples, as they often do, take this much more as a physical thing. And so when Jesus tells them, go and buy swords, they're like, "Oh, actually, Jesus, conveniently enough, we already have 2 swords. And that phrase, "it is enough," is kind of idiomatic. It probably is more accurately translated, "That's enough of that. Stop. You're missing the point. That's not what I'm talking about." But it's important to understand that the disciples are thinking that way. The disciples are thinking of physical swords and physical resistance. And so when Jesus goes into Gethsemane and he prays and it's late at night, we know that what then occurs is that Judas, one of the 12, betrays Jesus, has aligned himself with the Pharisees for money, and has decided to betray Jesus. And so when that narrative picks up later on in Luke, and this is repeated in all 4 gospel narratives, obviously we're getting into the most important part of the gospel. It says in verse 47, after Jesus has prayed these prayers, after he has sweated with great drops of blood, and said the famous line, "Father, it is your will to be done, not mine." It says, "While he was still speaking, behold, a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was preceding them, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, 'Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?' When those who were around him saw what was going to happen, they said, 'Lord, shall we strike with the sword?' And one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Jesus answered and said, 'Stop. No more of this.' He touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come against him, 'Have you come out with swords and clubs as you would against a robber? While I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this hour and the power of darkness are yours. This is recorded in all four Gospels, but it's only in Luke's that we're told the exact details that Jesus actually heals this man. Other Gospels are going to tell us that this servant of the high priest is by the name of Malchus. He's likely a slave. And the apostle who draws a sword and cuts it off is none other than Peter, which if we've been following the Gospel account, we would kind of expect it to be Peter, or maybe the sons of Zebedee, James, and John, but certainly one of those three very close disciples who are very quick to react, very impulsive. We're certainly not surprised to hear that it is Peter. What we may be surprised to hear, though, is that Jesus stops them, that Jesus does not want to resist this. Now, if we've been paying attention to what Jesus has been saying, we know that Jesus said this. We know that Jesus said he was not going to resist, that he was going to be led as a lamb to the slaughter. But I think this would be surprising to the apostles to hear this, that Jesus was not going to resist being seized, being arrested by the Pharisees. And it's funny because he even calls out the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, that we've been in the temple together for the past several days, and I've been teaching and we've been conversing, and yet you didn't come during those times to arrest me. You come now during the time of night when darkness has its power. And then they're going to rush through a trial. But the most important thing that I want to focus on in this miracle, this very brief account of Jesus using his healing upon an enemy, upon one of the ones that's coming to seize him and to arrest him, and ultimately, as Jesus knows, leads him to his death, is it validates what Jesus has talked about as being a king of peace. And it's why Jesus is going to be able to, when Pilate confronts him and asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus will be able to rightly say, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it was, my disciples would now be fighting for it. But as it is," he says, "I'm going to lay down my life." And so Peter, in his rash and impulsivity, could kind of ruin that claim, because people could say, hey, one of their disciples pulled a sword and cut off a guy's ear, which, by the way, if you're cutting off an ear, you're not really aiming for the ear. I mean, if you think about the strike that it would take to cut off an ear, either horizontal or vertical, you're probably going for a different target than the ear. Peter's likely trying to kill this guy and trying to save his master. And so they could very easily say, listen, one of the disciples tried to kill a guy. This is a violent offender. And yet Jesus, by stopping the situation, by disarming his apostles and then healing the damage, Jesus makes the claim clear that yes, he is a king of peace, that he has not come to violently overthrow anything, but instead he has come to restore peace to a broken world. And so this very small miracle actually validates the greater claim of Jesus, that he's not some revolutionary, he's not some zealot who's come to overthrow Rome. His concerns are far greater than that. His concerns are far more than that, than just some minor Judean revolt that Rome has to put down. His revolution is a revolution of the Spirit. His revolution is a revolution that the entire world is going to undergo. And so it is that Jesus is bound and taken forward. He never resists. He does not fight against the charges that are laid against him. He essentially just kind of lets things happen. And when they ask him questions, he doesn't directly blaspheme. He doesn't directly agree with the charges. But when they ask him, are you the Messiah? Are you the Son of God? He basically says, well, what you're saying is not wrong. And so based off of that, they then convict him. They then kind of lie about what he's doing to the Roman officials. And eventually Rome agrees with Jerusalem after much hesitation by Pilate to execute this man. But it's very clear from the entire gospel accounts that this trial is a mockery, that this is a violation of any sound judicial system, that Jesus is exactly who he's claimed to be. He is peaceful. He is nonviolent. He has done nothing wrong. He is an utterly innocent man in this process, even seeking to heal his enemies. He disarms completely any claims that he is anything other than what he truly is, the Son of God who's come to save all of mankind. And so this brief miracle validates who Jesus is. It confirms that when the time has come, when this critical moment is at hand, Jesus does not abandon the principles that he has taught, but instead fully embraces them, loving even his enemies, all the way to the point where they are arresting him. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know this is a fairly brief thought, but I think this miracle, small though it may be, it's important to note that Jesus is using his miracles to continue affirming who he is and what his ministry is really all about. Our next video, we get to the central crux. We get to the gospel account of the crucifixion and the resurrection. And then we'll have one more miracle that takes place after the resurrection. And then this series will be yours for consideration. It's been a good month of study, really. And I pray you have been edified by it. I pray you've been uplifted by it. And I pray that we all continue to study the miracles of Jesus and see the depths that they reveal about the character of Jesus and the mission that he brought and the salvation that he brought from it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.